Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Lori Kinnears, Chair of the Public Safety Committee.
Brian, are we ready to start?
Yes, I was on mute, but I said good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Lori Kinnear, Chair of the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you. We are on a really strict timeline
anytime to
this afternoon.
unmute yourself.
Need to be finished before 2:30. So we'll start right away with approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Nay? Great, thank you very much. First on our agenda is Sergeant, did we want anything taken off? I didn't hear from anybody. If not, we're going to start out with Sergeant Spearing. He's going to give us a quick update on the use of canines, numbers, etc. So Sergeant Spearing, do you want to take it away?
You bet, and I'll be quick. And I'm glad it's the first Monday of every month, so I only have 2 days of No Shave November and can spare you all the horrific details next month. Deployments for October, 76 deployments, 36 captures. 2 of those resulted in dog contacts. So the October bite ratio is 6%. Our year total is 2%. For the year total, we have 8 contacts, 326 captures. For training, obedience actually took the cake as far as what we did most of: 30% obedience, 26% apprehension, 21% building search. So when I first came on maybe 4 months ago, I talked about swapping body cameras out. That finally got approved. So that's going to be happening this week, where our team will be outfitted with the newer style Axon 3 body camera, which is harder to accidentally have shut off due to body movement. So unless there's any questions, that's it.
Council President, do you have a question?
No.
No? Okay.
Nope.
Any questions from council? Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I appreciate this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Next on the agenda, we have Chief Meidel, or one of your representatives, talking about overview of SBD's considerations for officer-involved critical incidents. And this is part 1. And we have 10 minutes allotted to that, so take it away.
Yes, good afternoon. So with the Initiative 940 that passed and the new process statewide, I asked Captain Arliff if he would lead the efforts in describing what that process looks like in terms of if SPD officers involved in the shooting, or if one of our partner agencies is, what that investigation looks like. And Brad, I saw you were logged on. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, take it away.
Okay, I'm gonna get my PowerPoint up here on the share screen, hopefully. Okay, so we run the Spokane Independent Investigative Response Team, which is our regional response. Okay, it's Spokane County agencies only. This was the latest iteration, was implemented back in January of 2020. All of the member agencies signed in September of 2020. However, this has actually been around for quite some time. Going back to 1994, we had the Inland Empire Law Enforcement Liaison Group, which was how we started doing some of the independent investigations. Although at that time and all the way through the Spokane Investigative Response Team in 2004, we still worked on our own investigations, although as a backup team, not as the primary investigating team. So this is 2019. This was the map of the area that we formerly did work in was through Ferry County, Stevens, Pend Oreille, Lincoln, and Spokane, and then some in Whitman, again, with the additional workload and responsibilities of the new format under Initiative 940, which then became the Substitute House Bill, as well as the Washington Administrative Code 139. We now do Spokane County only. Really, the investigative process, as put out on this graphic by the Training Commission, what I think maybe focus on today is this investigation piece here. That's the independent investigation. That's phase 2, I guess, of the process. And that is where we assume control of the scene as the investigating agency, conduct the investigation, and then prepare the investigative report. I think that's kind of the important focus of how those independent investigations work. Once all these things, the Training Commission had all the rulemaking process and open forums and statewide meetings, then this became a Washington Administrative Code, and there's WAC 139.11 and WAC 139.12 apply to the training as well as the investigations. This covers only deadly force now. In the past, we had the SEER team investigation for other activities that we would want maybe another law enforcement agency to investigate because some of people from maybe Spokane City were involved. We no longer have the ability to invoke this agreement with those. We just have to ask for mutual aid if we're going to take over an investigation because this law now applies to deadly force only. The WAC also laid out the groundwork for the independent investigation. Another key point that came out of Initiative 940 was community representative involvement. And then the other thing is the LETSCA training. That LETSCA is just an acronym for the name of the WAC, which is Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act. And that specifies some of the training components that have to go out for lead investigators on the independent investigative team. One of the things that's important is that the agency websites list resources that the public can look at in terms of seeing what's happening with officer-involved fatalities. In city, we're working on listing out all of those steps, and the Sheriff's Office, as another partner agency, has theirs underway for an update as well. This is a list of our community representatives from both the Sheriff's Office and the Spokane Police Department. And again, those community representatives during an investigation become basically the community's eyes and ears and are at the table for some of the updates and walkthroughs of some of the investigative material from the file, as well as looking at the press releases and some other key things that are denoted by the WAC. Lead investigators, both from the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department, and then the local detachment of the State Patrol. These are all people that meet the criteria that we've set forth to be able to be a lead investigator. And again, so if it was a Spokane Police Department involved shooting, either the Spokane County Sheriff's Office or the State Patrol would assume the lead. If the use of deadly force is of the Sheriff's Office, it's likely that we would assume the lead, although the State Patrol could also assume the lead for them. And then the other two agencies would be involved in the investigation. The agency who uses deadly force will not be involved in the investigation whatsoever. So the next steps that we're looking at as we roll into 2021, we have non-board member agencies in Spokane County. Some of the smaller agencies will incorporate additional community representatives and then train some other lead investigators from those agencies. We have some introductory training for community representatives lined out. Unfortunately, we had planned to have some of that done when the pandemic shutdown occurred earlier this year. And some of the training may be able to be done in a format such as what we're using right now. And some of it is really going to have to be done when we can get people together in a room or a space, because there's some physical things that need to be done, and then also just the familiarity with the FaceTime and the introductions of things. There's some parts of the training are going to have to be done in person. The Training Commission is still have some deliverables as far as the LETSCA training. There are certain training blocks and components that they are to provide to certify people as lead investigators under the WAC. And so we're still waiting on them to make that training available. We believe that at this point, with frankly, the vast amount of training that we've had prior to, well, we had some reductions in 2020, certainly, and then in 2019. But when we look at the resumes and the training records of our investigators, they have a very robust background in investigations and investigations of shootings and everything else. So we feel like we exceed being in substantial compliance with the intent and requirements of the WAC. And then we'll be looking for the funding for and providing the annual training that's required both by our protocol agreement locally, and then the WAC also requires that the team train as a team annually. So I try to make that as brief as possible for an overview in order to allow time for any questions.
Thank you. We've had a technical glitch. Hannah Lee tells me we need to pause for 30 seconds because Council President is on mute permanently. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but in this case, I think he wants to talk. So, Captain Arliff, give us about 30 seconds for Hannah Lee to reset this, and then we'll take questions. So thanks for that, appreciate it. And while we're waiting, Hannah Lee's going to tell me when we're good to go. She's going to text me, I assume. Be thinking of questions you want to ask. I think this is really important for us to know what's going on in this area so that when people ask us, we can have informed answers.
Councilwoman Kinnear, while we're waiting, do you mind if Brad goes over what the actual process looks like as an example?
Sure.
So Brad, like as an example, let's say we had an incident at division in Sprague. So SPD was involved. SPD would, in essence, render first aid. We would do what we call lock down the scene, secure the scene, which is basically block traffic. We would put up some plastic tape to keep people out of the scene as well until the investigators get there. You're typically going to see an inner and an outer perimeter. The inner perimeter is really, and Brad, definitely feel free to jump in here as well. The inner perimeter is the actual scene where we don't want anything disturbed. And then you'll have the outer perimeter, which is to keep folks away where we can have our resources as well. So if, in this example, you have the Sheriff's Office respond as the lead investigative agency, typically WSP will send one or two detectives as well. They will get what's called basically what's the phrase I'm looking for, Brad, on the direction shots were fired? Are we looking for, anyone else that may be involved?
Yeah, we try to take a safety statement, public safety statement in the very beginning, just to find out if there was any outstanding evidence, any outstanding suspects, any outstanding things that the investigators would need to know. very early on, in addition, as you mentioned, Chief, to rendering any kind of first aid, which is required also by the statute and the guidelines that we've been given from the Training Commission and the WAC 139. Then we would also begin preserving any evidence that's fleeting, as well as talking to any witnesses on a very brief canvas to locate people who might have seen, heard, or observed something and record their information. But once the investigators have arrived and are ready to take over the scene, then our participation in any of that or any further amount of the investigation would be over. And it would completely be taken over by another agency for the duration of the entire investigation. We would have no more interaction or no more information with that investigation.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. So then we bring the officers down to the station. The lead investigative agency will send resources to process the scene, interview any witnesses, neighbors that may have seen or heard something. They will then, we call it processing the officer. That's where they'll look over their uniform, look at their equipment, and do what's called an inventory on their equipment. Then once they get done with that inventory, we, as the agency, will then put them on the standard administrative leave. Typically, that administrative leave is going to be until they are able to provide their statement to the lead investigative agency. In this scenario, it would be the sheriff's office. And that can be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. We also do it just for their own mental health, give a chance to check out, get a couple good nights of rest, replenish, and then once they have provided their statement, typically then they will come back to work. One of the things, Brad, can you go over why does it seem to take so long? Why does it seem to take a couple months to get these investigations completed and forwarded onto the prosecutor's office?
Well, the reason can vary, but there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of these investigations are several hundred, if not 1,000 pages. And like in our case, you could have body cameras, you can have surveillance cameras from businesses, you can have physical evidence from the other person involved, which may be phone records or just a number of things. Toxicology reports from an autopsy through the medical examiner's office, right there can take 6, 8 weeks or even longer to come back and be incorporated. We've seen some of them be, almost 6 months, just depending on how busy the lab is. So there's a lot of moving parts as to why those all those take so long. The other thing to keep in mind is on that list of investigators that I had up briefly, and I'll see if I can go back with this. There we go, right here. So you have 7 detectives from the sheriff's office, and you're looking at 8 detectives from the police department. So we have 8 here. If we are conducting the investigation of a sheriff's office use of deadly force, that may take 2 of our investigators working on that. And so it's going to take some time because they don't get a reduction in any of their other workload. We still have more work than we can deal with this. And so in the past, where this might have been shared by a couple of detectives from the sheriff's office as well in a backup role, even if that means going to property or talking to some witnesses, we now do the whole thing. And so it's the same on their side. So if it's our shooting, our use of deadly force, their cases that they have for the whole county don't go away. And so they're getting the additional reports and getting the things as they can and then submitting it to the prosecutor's office.
Yeah.
We're gonna do a test now, see if Council President has a voice.
Yes, I think I do. Thanks. My first question is, I was just wanting to hear what you think the biggest challenges will be in this new system, which in a lot of ways mirrors the system that our department pioneered with the sheriff long ago. It's a little different now, but I'm wondering what challenges and what support would be helpful from the rest of the city while you're standing this new system up.
And before you answer, we're We're getting short on time, so if you could keep the answer as brief as possible, that'd be great.
Sure. I think it's just, we have had this type of system in place, more or less for, a considerable length of time. So we're used to operating under that. I think the thing that's going to take the most getting used to is when it was a use of deadly force by a Spokane police employee, even though we were not the lead agency, we were in a backup role. And so we would attend the meetings. We knew what some of the mile markers were for the investigation. Under this new system, there's a bright line there, and we do not have any of that information, nor can we ask for it, nor should we, because the legislature, the training commission, the stakeholders that participated in this said they didn't want that. So there is likely to be, I think that's something as elected officials to be aware of. There are going to be times when constituents are going to be asking what is going on. The Spokane Police Department is going to not know that, nor will they be able to provide that information because they don't know it. So, I mean, that's something just to be aware of, to educate people on. And then certainly the other thing that would support this change to accommodate this is going to be the training dollars for us to stay current on things, to be able to continue to do the standard of work that we normally do. And then again, just being cognizant of the personnel time involved, in that, we have 8 major crimes detectives listed there who have a responsibility to investigate other Class A and B significant felonies, from homicides to significant assaults, robberies, kidnappings in the city. And we don't want to diminish our capability to do those cases while we're handling these type of independent investigative team cases. So at some point, we may look to be adding an FTE just for the workload.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Captain? I can't see all of you on the screen, so speak up if you have a question, please. Okay. Captain Arliff, thank you for this. It was informative, and I look forward to the second edition of this next month. So we're going to move on.
What do you like covered on the part 2?
Let's talk offline because I'm not sure, but let's talk. We can agree on something together. That'd be great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. We've got Amber Richards. Can you do this in 5 minutes, mayoral appointee? We all got the information, so perhaps this is just a time to ask questions. So Amber, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me, council member?
Yes, I can. Why don't you go ahead?
So I will keep this very brief since you do have the briefing paper, but essentially the mayor has selected Cupid Alexander to come forward for council appointment for the Neighborhood Housing and Human Services Division Director position. This will come forward to you for a formal action on the 9th. Mr. Alexander has an impressive background. He's a great candidate. He has demonstrated leadership experience coupled with a strong background in public policy development and execution. He regularly invests in the profession. He participates in a number of speaking engagements, is involved with a number of professional associations, and he's received quite a few awards for his work. Perhaps one of the most notable is National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, the National Emerging Leader Award in 2018. So we are excited to bring him forward for confirmation. And again, just to keep it brief, I am certainly happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Any questions for Amber? Council members? Okay, go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, not really a question, but just that I had not received his resume, so I did reach out and ask for that. I don't know if that was sent to all council, so I didn't want people to think just one council member got it. So if not,
Okay,
send that out.
let me make sure that that happens, and I apologize.
I did get it, but.
Okay. Any other questions? Wonderful. We're going to move on to, this is mine, and I think it's Chief Schaefer, opiate-related overdose case, 6-year summary. All I want to know is if are there any anomalies, a surge in cases, anything outstanding? You don't have to do a deep dive. Captain Schaefer.
Hi, it's Brian. I'm actually just pulling up on a little collapse here. Can Mike Lopez take care of that?
Yes, Mike, are you there? Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So the bottom line answer to your question is we are not seeing a significant spike in relation to previous years of opiate-related overdoses. So we tend to stay just below 1 per day, and that really hasn't varied since 2014, where we did see a significant spike in the number of opiate-related overdoses.
Okay, 1 per day is, I mean, that seems astronomical to me. But if it's not spiking, does anybody have any questions or comments on this? Yes, go ahead, Cathcart.
Yeah, just wondering, you specifically you're talking about opiates, but I wonder, what about other substances? Is there a higher rate of overdose with other substances?
That's a great question, and one that actually have been able to validate through a number of different resources, including local emergency departments, and one of the physicians who oversees a substance use treatment program. And methamphetamine in Spokane is really more prevalent than heroin. We see a lot more methamphetamine, and here recently, probably in the last 6 to 8 months, I'm seeing more and more reports of dual use of heroin and methamphetamine. And it's an interesting phenomenon. It appears as if, and this is just anecdotal, that a lot of the heroin and methamphetamine use is specific to individuals in our community who are unhoused. And there's a thought that they're probably using heroin during the day to try to get rest, and methamphetamine during the night to stay awake, expressly out of the concern for their own safety. We have a predatory population of unhoused individuals, and a lot of folks fear for their safety, so they take methamphetamine in the interest of trying to stay awake, and then use heroin in the daytime to try to get some rest where it's a little safer.
Just a real quick follow-up to that. If you happen to know, what's the street price of kind of a typical dosage of meth and or heroin?
Boy, I have really no clue, Councilman Cathcart.
How accessible it is, because obviously we talk a lot about folks that are experiencing homelessness that are using, and I'm just curious, just the accessibility and cost. So we can.
Yeah, I would be speculating at best to provide a real good answer for you.
Hey, Mike, what about gender specifics? Is this thing one gender more than the other?
The data that I have and I've collected over the 6-year period suggests that males are more frequently users of opiates, specifically heroin. Heroin is our single highest opiate-related overdose drug. But through the years, it's been predominantly males, but females, the gender is starting to increase a little bit on the female side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Mr. Lopez, thank you. I appreciate that information. Right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Going to move on to Mr. Cathcart. You're doing 5 minutes of the resolution that we're going to be considering tonight, the condemning private armed militia groups. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I just, we've received, the public has seen some kind of a legal analysis that the county prosecutor had put out. And of course, council has received a private legal analysis from our in-house city attorney. And I just would love for the chief and or our city attorney to just maybe talk a little bit about enforcement and how you go about identifying the folks that would potentially be penalized under this change, and just kind of want to get a better grasp in the public specifically to have a better grasp of exactly how this would work.
Before Chief answers, would it be okay if I tell you that I did have a conversation with Mr. Armsby this morning about this very topic, and he said there's going to have to be some work on part of city legal to figure out how to move forward on this resolution. So I don't know that there are going to be some really solid answers that are going to answer your question. We can let Chief Meidel go ahead and remember to be brief, but just tell us what you think this is going to entail.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to weigh on this. So, one of the challenges I had when asked about the specific RCW was obviously enforcement. When you're looking at enforcement, there's typically going to be certain elements that have to be proved, and each and every single one of those elements is necessary in order to rise to the level of probable cause, and then obviously conviction as well. So when you're looking at government intrusion and where the First Amendment, Second Amendment, all of these things come together and they mix, and yet the government is allowed to put parameters on certain behavior as well. One of my concerns was if we see individuals out there and they have, let's just say, rifles in camouflage gear, is that an element of being a part of militia? I think most of them say, well, no, but it is definitely something that makes them stand out. So how do you develop those elements necessary to prove they're part of the militia and meet the different elements under the RCW? Go up and talk to them. So now if we're going to talk to them and ask them guilt-seeking questions, do we have to advise them of their constitutional rights? You have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we ensure that we are honoring the rights of individuals for First Amendment, Second Amendment, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, all that, while still looking at the elements of the RCWs that Council President Beggs forwarded to us as well, so that we, is it a free talk? Is it a voluntary contact? If they don't want to talk to us, do they have to? There's a lot of variables as well as a lot of these folks, are they part of a formal militia? And there's different, militias become a huge umbrella term for a lot of different entities. We actually do have a registered militia in the state of Washington. It is actually recognized by the state of Washington. It's called the Lightfoot Militia. And then you have some other folks who are either identified as or identify themselves as a part of a militia, different than the registered militia with the state of Washington. And then you throw in the mix some of the white nationalism and white supremacy as well, is you'll see a lot of the narrative is being blended. In the Lightfoot Militia registered with the state of Washington, an example is the leader of that is a gentleman named Dan, and he actually, his second command is an African-American. Very nice guy, served in the Navy. So you're seeing a lot of this overlap as well of a militia with being associated with, if you're a militia, you're white nationalist, and yet ours here in Washington State, they have African-American as their second command. So there's a lot of variables as well. And then what's the difference between a recognized, unrecognized, unorganized, and then how are you going to develop that probable cause as well? So those are a lot of the variables that we ask legal to kind of, hey, help us navigate through this process as well, and give us some guidance of contacting individuals who may be out there, and how far can we push that intrusion before we could technically be accused of overstepping our lawful authority as well.
Just to be clear.
Scott has a. Do you want to in and say something?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, because I struggle with this as well. When I get, and Chief Meidel, I think I've sent you a couple of these. So when we have people who are on Facebook, a group that's on Facebook, and they are threatening or intimidating, saying they're going to be out either, at the peaceful protest, or they're going to be in front of this place, and they're, and they make those bold statements. is there a way does that help connect, do those statements help connect a stronger chance of arrest or removing them than the others that are more silent? Because I'm more concerned about the ones that come right out, and I have people send it to me, and it's, we're going to be there, and we're not going to do this and put up with this. And so that's where I struggle with this, and I don't know how you weigh that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think you're getting closer if they're expressing what their intent is. I think you're getting closer. And then there's some other elements of are they training? Are they actually engaging in the activity and the behavior? So I think when you can get a message of them expressing what their intent is, and that intent lines up with potentially one of the elements, I think you're getting closer.
But if I'm just a frustrated citizen and I have a rifle, it's okay for me to dress up in a, I don't know what those camo
fatigues.
Fatigues, yeah, and walk downtown in my tennis shoes and my fatigues with a rifle, and as long as I'm being quiet and being good, I'm okay. I can't get arrested.
Technically, yeah, open carry is still, yeah.
And what if I don't have an open carry permit? Would anybody ask me for that, or?
Don't need it. You do not need a permit. Washington State is an open carry state, which means you can walk around with a rifle. There's a very few exceptions. Federal courthouse, bars. You can walk around with a rifle pretty much anywhere in the state, except there's very few small areas. You do not need any kind of permit. And actually, the same goes for handguns. A lot of folks don't know this as well, but you can walk around with a handgun as long as it's not concealed. We are an open carry state. It puts us in kind of a tough position a lot of times because it typically is unusual day to day when you're seeing folks walking around with firearm, but it's completely legal.
That's frightening. Council President, you look like you're going to talk.
Yeah, I just, Chief, it looks like to me that these laws in Washington have been around for over 100 years, and I know the U.S. Supreme Court has affirmed them as recently as the Heller versus District of Columbia, which was really a landmark case on the Second Amendment. So they still said these laws. And I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the statute. It doesn't criminalize being in the militia. It seems to criminalize marching around together with firearms in public if you're not part of one of the recognized militias. So it seems like it's based on conduct, not on intent. And then they have a defense if it turns out really they're part of that Lightfoot militia or the National Guard or a foreign army in a parade. But just if people are coordinating together in an organized fashion, not a membership card, but just, marching like they did at that first protest that we saw so much on video, that seems to be the elements, not their memberships or what they believe. And I totally want to support you getting all the support you need from City Legal. So I just, I totally am with you. And I'm just wondering, since it's been around 100 years, what discussions have you ever had before? It seems like this maybe is a new law that people are talking about, even though it's been around a long time. So just wondering how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, no, that's, it like you pointed out, it's been around for a long time. And there is, we did some poking around last week. There's no department yet that has enforced this. And what that means is we certainly would have loved to have talked to them about how did you enforce this? What does that look like? How did you establish the probable cause? And as far as the marching around, like during parades, and that's where, that's the challenge is if you get a group of folks that want to go down there and just, in their view, they're expressing their Second Amendment right, is that considered a violation of marching around organized, or if they're just standing there, but they're not marching, they're walking to the location. So if we go up and contact them because we see them and they're saying, we're not marching, we're walking down to City Hall, for example. Okay, so are they in a parade or are they just going from point A to point B? So yeah, there's just a lot of variables, and we want to definitely make sure that if we're struggling with this and trying to find out how do we determine the elements, how do we develop probable cause, I don't want to put our officers in that position until we can give them some pretty clear guidance. And anytime we get a new law like this or something that we haven't enforced, I definitely want to bring legal in and say, help guide us through this process of what this looks like, because there is a lot of variables. And if there's 2, they're just buddies or just friends. If there's 6, if there's 8, so there's always going to be, and you know this, there's always going to be some gray, and that's where the judges have to, or the jury has to decide that small sliver of gray. What we're trying to do is narrow down that huge band of gray to more of a small sliver to help our officers in their guidance out on the street.
I would encourage council members, if they have further questions, to contact Mr. Ormsby or Chief Meidel before tonight. That's what I did, and it did clear up a lot of questions for me, and we got into some real knockdown, well, not knockdown, drag out, but challenging Mr. Ormsby to the law. And I am not a lawyer, but I thought I was at the moment. So I would encourage you to reach out to either of these gentlemen to get some of these things cleared up for tonight. Let's see, who's next? Oh, sit-and law enforcement discussion. Council President, you have 20 minutes. I urge you not to take all 20. And then you have real-time shelter information discussion for 10. If you could keep that fairly short, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, sure. And really, they're related. So this is for Chief Meidel or his designees on it. So we all read the Inlander article, I think about a week ago or so, that basically pulled a bunch of police reports on arrests for sit and lie, and then seemed to demonstrate that information in the reports about whether or not shelters were available was inaccurate or at least ambiguous. So that was kind of one part of it, but it really led another conversation, since we also had the subsequent snowstorm, about how to have a real-time, up-to-date, outward-facing website that the providers of the shelters can go online directly, instead of calling into the city and then the police trying to figure out what's going on. It would just be real time. And so those are 2 different issues, but related, and maybe some of them are police, some of them are CHHS. So, but they can be definitely taken together, and I'm sure it will be less than 30 minutes. But I guess I wanted to hear maybe first from the chief on how we're doing with training officers on making sure that there actually was a shelter bed open the night before, or there is one open at the time that they're arresting people, and how to confirm that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also asked the captains to participate as well, since it's the precincts that are really taking the lead on enforcement of the ordinances as well. So, one of the things that we learned through answering a lot of questions for the Inlander was process. So, give just one example. This is just one of several examples. Is we require officers to go to SharePoint and look on SharePoint at the current vacancy of these various shelters. Now, my understanding is, and I've asked the captains to correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that typically our police dispatch is going to be the one that was updating that, and we relied on the shelters to call in with updated bed counts for that SharePoint as well. We're kind of in the process of changing to a different software platform, much easier to understand. So if an officer is out and looking at enforcement of illegal camping, and then you have the Inlander that went and looked at these spreadsheets from the night before, one of the things we know is that as the night starts to close in, people start to filter into these shelters. So if the officer is writing, go out and doing enforcement, let's say at 5 p.m. as an example, there will still be shelter available. But as it gets closer and closer to those shelters closing down, people start to trickle in. And by the time they close, they may very well be full, or they may fill before their actual closing time. So that snapshot of that software is going to show that it's full, whereas it's actually they're trickling in throughout the evening as well. Another hiccup that we ran into was earlier before COVID, and I'm going to use Truth Ministries as an example. They had what was called low barrier. My understanding is you had to be sober and $2 to get in for the night. Once COVID hit and we had to spread out the beds, it reduced capacity by about 50%. The city contracted with Truth Ministries to provide more beds during the whole COVID season. And the city basically was willing to pay that $2. So that then removed the barrier. So Truth Ministries became a no barrier that we could count as part of those numbers as well. And then at some point during this late spring or early summer, that contract with Truth Ministries was basically no longer in effect. And my understanding is that information did not make it to us. So we were still moving forward under the assumption that we still had a contract with Truth Ministries, no barrier. So that was an example of one of the shelters that we were using as well. And then I'll ask the captains to weigh in. One thing too, just for clarification, what we've told our officers now is put in the specific shelters and the specific beds that are vacant so that we don't have this issue again. So if it is 3 p.m. and you find 2 or 3 shelters that have beds, put that in your report. Don't just put in your report you checked and there was shelter capacity available. But for Captain Singley, Captain Meidel, Captain Griffiths, do you guys want to weigh in?
Yeah, this is Dave Singley. Council President, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I would echo a lot of that. We always strive to ensure that there's sufficient shelter space available before we engage in enforcement. And we're also always looking to improve and fine-tune that. I know Shauna Ernst has been working on the dashboard, which will be able to show real-time bed space that you referenced. But another point specific to sit and lie that's relevant is really pre-COVID, we had daytime shelter space available at a variety of locations downtown. And the primary one was HOC, House of Charity, was open 7 a.m. to noon every day. So we regularly engaged in sit and lie enforcement when those daytime shelter spaces were available during the daytime, and used those and referenced them in our reports. However, once COVID hit, all those drop-in spaces are no longer available. They've had to put in a variety of restrictions, and they typically only let people stay during the day that had a bed the night before. So at that point, and ever since, we've really relied on the SharePoint data. But depending on what specific citations someone's looking at, if you're looking at last year or if you're looking at early this year, pre-COVID, there's probably a number of the sit and lie citations that were specifically tied to daytime drop-in availability as opposed to the SharePoint overnight availability.
I wondered, you mentioned Shauna Ernst, and I'm not sure I know you, Shauna, but I see you up on the board working on a dashboard. I wondered if you could jump in of what you're working on.
Sure, I can do that. I haven't met most of you. I'm Shauna Ernst. I'm the IT manager and digital forensic lab manager for the police department. I've been with the city for about 1.5 years. So I'll go ahead and I can share my screen with you. And I have both our current process up to show you, and then I can show you that future dashboard. So this is our current SharePoint site. You can see right over here on the left-hand side, there's a link to our shelter space inventory. We've also put this exact same list out in Microsoft Teams. So we've made it as accessible as we possibly can for officers. It's broken into 2 sections. The top section is for where there are low barrier shelters and they can be used for enforcement. You can see here's an example, House of Charity, the last time the information was modified, who they serve, the availability, and then a phone number. And then we have the available spaces right here. So this is what we're doing now. We also have down below the higher barrier shelters. And we include these in case, we are interacting with a person experiencing homelessness and there isn't room, or we want to try to help them find other resources. But those are not used for enforcement. So the new site, I have to log in with my, let me make sure I type my right password. Log into the city website. Let me get there. There we go. And then it's just on our beta site for right now while we're working on it. So this is what the page looks like. We obviously need to come up with some intro text right here, but each one of these shelters is listed with the number of beds available. If it's in gray, that means it hasn't been updated in the last 24 hours. And then we have some police department specific information at the bottom, including the phone number and procedures for officers. That's why I had to sign into the site with my police account, is to get this information. So I can come in here and edit this information. And this is just a test site, so I'm not changing anything for real. So I could go ahead and say that this shelter is closed for now and update the shelter, and then go back to that shelter status list, and you could see that it shows up in red and it's closed. We also have a little bubble at the top that denotes that it's available for SMC or not. Again, this is all test data. So I could come in here again, and if a shelter does decide to have to lower their barriers for inclement weather, we can go down into the shelter information and really quickly say it's eligible or not eligible. And then that'll reflect on the website. So you could see it moved it down here and got rid of that SMC bubble. So the next steps in getting this ready to go is we need to discuss with the providers how to get them access so that they can start updating this information themselves. We also need to kind of come up with what we want real time to mean. Do we want them to update this 3 times a night? Do we want to update this when they reach certain thresholds? And then we have this available for officers as well. So if we do end up with a situation where one of the providers hasn't provided an update, SPD can still provide that update to make sure we have the most accurate information. Everything in here is logged. We'll know who changed or updated a value, when they did it, and we're logging the weather too. So we're building out a system that can be used for long-term analytics as needed. One of the things I forgot to mention on our current process, we do save off a copy of this list every single day so that we have the history there and we know, we can go back to last week and see when we had shelter availability and when we didn't. Go ahead and stop sharing. Do you have any questions about that?
Councilmember Wilkerson.
Thank you for the update. The one gap that I continue to see is there may be shelter beds on the east side of the city, but the person's on the west side, and there is no consistency of how to get that person across town. There's no shuttle service, and I don't know what role Spokane Police plays in that piece of transportation at night. No buses, no bus money, what that looks like.
Chief Meidel, do you want to respond, or you have a response?
No, it's, sometimes our officers will give them actually a ride to the shelter depending on a call load, and then quite often they may have a lot of items with them as well. But that is always going to be an issue for sure, is not having shelter space spread throughout different regions. And I don't have an answer unless we were able to get bus passes from STA. Having said that as well, some of these folks are way out by the river, and so it would probably take them quite a while to gather their things and get to a location where a bus is. But in terms of having them dispersed throughout the city, that absolutely is a logistical issue for some of these folks.
Mr. Cathcart, go ahead.
Two questions for me. First, I'm wondering if there's a third party who wants to try to use this data and enhance its access. Is there an API built into this that they can get access to make that possible?
There's not an API built into this natively. We use the City of Spokane website tools. we could definitely provide the data in a format that would be accessible via our open data site.
Okay. I could just see some folks maybe wanting to create phone apps or some other stuff using this data, and that would certainly be helpful in terms of doing that. My other, I guess, comment / question is I wonder if we couldn't have, through maybe the COC, any shelters that utilize city resources or interact with the city, perhaps require them to use some sort of a software package that would automatically, in real time, update this data, so that it's not an input issue. It's just every time they check in another individual, it just gets fed right into the system, so we don't have to have them updating it every so often.
So that is a part of the discussion. I think there's some logistical issues there. So we're going to, our plan is to start with them updating it periodically, but then move to something that is truly real time. So we have to take this in a couple of steps, because the providers currently have to make updates in a variety of systems, and we really don't want to make their jobs harder. So that's coming, but it might be a little more long term.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
One of the challenges, too, just to add to that, one of the challenges is, my understanding is folks can check in and you can have the person collecting the information, but some of these facilities, they can leave. And so they'll check in, they may stay for an hour or two and then leave for the rest of the day or the rest of the night as well. So going back to what Sean had said as well is there is that point where they may have to actually go through the facility and actually look at the bed spaces as well. So again, I'm just being told that a lot of folks check in and then they go out a side door or back door and they're gone. So they may actually have beds all showing full. And that's where sometimes you'll see as well that our officer will actually call the shelters and ask, hey, I know you show full, but do you have a bed available? And they'll go do a quick loop around the facility and say, yeah, it looks like we have a couple beds available as well. So there's going to be some of those gaps. And like Sean had said, we'll have to work with the service providers on how are you going to keep that updated as well? Because just because they checked in doesn't mean they didn't check out, 20 or 30 minutes later through the back door.
Any other questions for either Shauna or Chief Meidel? Council President, do you have more?
Yep, I do. Shauna, first, thanks so much for leading this work. I think we've wanted it for a long time. It's great to have someone on it, and it looks like you're going in the right direction. I think you might have answered it, but it sounds to me like you can have an outwardly facing web page that would not necessarily have all the information that the police have on theirs, but that we can. And I'm just wondering what your sense is of when that outwardly facing page, even though it might not be real-time updated, when that might be available to the public.
Thank you. So first, I just want to clarify that this was a group effort. We had participation from NHHS and CIT, and there were a lot of people involved in this, so not just me. And second, I think we could have that up and running very soon. I think we need maybe one more meeting to finalize some of the communication, and then we could have that available. So I don't want to put a timetable without talking to the rest of the group, but I would say within a couple weeks at the most.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's great information, Shauna. Thanks so much, and you made it understandable, so that's always appreciated. Does anybody else have any questions? That's the last item on our agenda for today. Yes, Councilmember Stratton.
Hey, Shauna, are you okay if we give you a call if we have, I don't know, any input or questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Our next meeting is December 7th, I believe. So until then, thank you, everybody, and thank you all who contributed to this meeting. It was informative, and we appreciate it, appreciate your time, and we'll see you all at 3:30. Thanks very much.